Hello students, I'm Dr. Himanshu Kanpal and today we are going to discuss the topic periods of English literature. This topic is important for the students of English literature and for the students who are preparing for various competitive exams. Periods of English literature. English literature, the body of written works produced in the English language by inhabitants of the British Isles, including Ireland, from the 7th century to the present day. So, the major literatures written in English outside the British Isles are treated separately under American literature, Australian literature, Canadian literature, and New Zealand literature. So we can see that looking at the splendid fabric of English literature, we realize in it a coat of many colors, for it is shot with the varying tints of racial characteristics. To its making have gone the prismatic fancy of the Celts, the sombre passion of the Teutons, the golden gaiety of France, Scandinavian grace, Italian purples, yet it is not a thing of patchwork quality, but a harmonious blend. According to amateur Brahms, historians divide the continuity of English literature into segments of times that are called periods. The exact number, dates, and names of these periods vary and conforms to widespread practice. A period in the sense is a certain length of time during which a particular kind of taste prevails and the literature of which is therefore marked by various common characteristics of subject and matter, thought, tone, and style. When we study the history of English literature, we find that it had passed through certain definite phases, each having marked characteristics. These phases may be termed as ages or periods, which are named either after the central literary figures or the important rulers of England, literary movements, or termed by literary historians. So, the history of English literature must bring out the relationship between writer and group. It must trace the rise, growth, and decline of schools and movements, and whenever any given writer has been specially prominent in their evolution. Literary periods are spans of time for literature that shares intellectual, linguistic, religious, and artistic influences and influences which belong to general life, politics, and society. Now we are going to begin with the Old English period. Although historians have delineated the eras of British literature in different ways over time, common divisions are outlined below. The Old English period or the Anglo-Saxon period from 450 to 1066. One of the most remarkable thing about the historical aspect of English language is that it is a mixed language that several languages mingle with English. What is known as Old English was itself an evolution from the dialects that were spoken by the three related tribes that came to settle in England in 5th century. These were the West Germanic tribes known by the names the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. The history of English literature, which starts with the Germanic tradition of Anglo-Saxon settlers, which were around 5th to 11th century AD, and the first long narrative poems in the history of English literature were Beowulf and Widsith. So the modern writers insist that in foundations, English is essentially a Teutonic language, that the English of the 14th century grew out of the Anglo-Saxon of the 5th century by a regular course of evolution. Christian missionaries introduced the Roman alphabet in England, Beowulf is the earliest and the greatest epic in Anglo-Saxon. The first long narrative poems in the history of English literature, Beowulf and Widsith. These two were highly narrative poems of this early period of the history of English literature. And Beowulf is considered as the first English epic poem, and some of the other famous works produced during the Old English literature include Exodus, The Wanderer, Wife's Lament, The Battle of Maldon, etc. Moreover, some of the famous writers of Old English literature were Cenwulf and Cadmean. The Middle English period, that is from 1066 to 1500, that is Anglo. First we divided in Anglo-Norman period that starts from 1066 to 1340. It is also referred to as the later Middle English literary period. The medieval English literature comprises of a diverse range of works, as the population of England during this time was literate and a considerable portion was also bilingual and trilingual. So the year 1066 was important landmark in the history of English literature because it was the year of Norman conquest. First we are going to talk about the Anglo-Norman conquest, then we are going to talk about Chaucer's England. William the Conqueror invaded the island of Britain, and the Anglo-Norman French became the language of the kings. Latin was mostly used for the written language, especially by the church and in official records. Middle English is just the mixture of Old English and Anglo-Norman. The grammatical structure and vocabulary of which were the result of Norman French influences acting upon the Old Anglo-Saxon material. This is Anglo-Norman period. Second, the Age of Chaucer, that is 1340 to 1400. Geoffrey Chaucer is amongst the highly regarded poets within the period of 1340 to 1400, and he was born in the reign of Edward III, lived through that of Richard II, and died the year of Henry IV ascended the throne. The age of Chaucer was the age of unrest and transition and the highest development of medieval civilization in England. Medieval here means relating to Middle Ages, after the fall of the great Roman Empire state and before the rebirth of culture that we call Renaissance. Medieval civilization in England and also the mixture of English chivalry. The court shows the spirit of romantic idealism. Some of the important events of the age of Chaucer: the Black Death epidemic, which occurred in 1348-49, beginning of the Reformation movement in England by John Wycliffe and his Lollards. Lollards were the followers of Wycliffe, and they wanted reform of Western Christianity, and the Peasants' Revolt of 1381. The greatest work of the period is the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer, and he also renowned for his courtly love poetry, which includes famous Canterbury Tales, then the House of Fame, the Book of Duchess, etc. He became one of the he was one of the most famous and the highly regarded acclaimed writers of the age. Geoffrey Chaucer, which entitled him to claim of being called the father of English poetry. Some of the important writers of the age were William Langland. William Langland's famous religious works include Pius the Plowman, also deserves a mention as it represents another popular genre of this period of English literature, which was secular and religious prose. Then there was John Wycliffe, John Gower, John Barber, etc. Here I would like to mention that Chaucer's work comprises of three periods: the French period, the Italian period, in which he has written the works like Troilus and Cressida, the House of Fame, Parliament of Fowls, and the Legend of Good Women. Then the English period, that is the Canterbury Tales. William Langland, as I've earlier told you, that he is famous for writing the religious works, Pius the Plowman. And John Wycliffe, he has done the first translation, that is the complete English version of Bible into any modern vernacular tongue, that is in 1380, and it is a prose work. Then there is John Gower, who has written the works such as Speculum Meditans, Vox Clementis, and Confessio Amantis. Then John Barber, the work Brus. Now we move to from Chaucer's to Tottel's Miscellany. From Chaucer to Tottel's Miscellany is the period between the age of Chaucer and the Elizabethan age. This is 1400 to 1557. When Chaucer passed away in the dawn of 15th century, we enter upon a long barren period in its history. The unproductiveness of the age may simply be the result of a dearth of literary talent. It was not in England age of great men in any field of activity, and there was little enough to inspire and much to repress literary genius. Still, there were poets like Thomas Sutcliffe, John Lydgate, William Dunbar, Robert Henderson, who flourished in poetry. New movement in poetry at the Italianized court of Henry VIII. Thomas Sutcliffe has written the poems like The Governor of Princes, Murder of God, The Dialogue with a Friend, and The Regiment of Princes. And John Lydgate has composed the works like Story of Thebes, long production designed as a new Canterbury Tales, and the works like Troy Book. Then there were the Scottish writers, that is the Scottish Chaucerians, who are called as Scottish Chaucerians. William Dunbar, who has composed The Thistle and the Rhodes. Then there was King James I of England, who has written a long poem, The King's Quair. Then Robert Henderson, who is written the work Testament of Cressida, Robin and Mackney, Orpheus, The Wolf and the Lamb, etc. Then there were writers like Gowan Douglas, who has written a medieval allegory, that is the Palace of Honor. White and Surrey are the chief poets represented in collection of songs and sonnets. Sir Thomas White and Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, has a massive contribution to this age. Thomas introduced sonnets to Great Britain, and the Earl of Surrey brought the use of blank verse, which was later utilized by celebrated Elizabethan writers like Shakespeare, Marlowe, Milton, etc., to name a few. So, Tottel's Miscellany is considered as the first printed book amongst the different poetry works of this period. White and Surrey are the chief poets represented in the collection of songs and sonnets by various authors, also known by the name of its publisher as Tottel's Miscellany, that was published in 1557. Important events is the establishment of printing press in Germany in 1476 by William Caxton. Some of the important prose writers of the age were William Tyndale, Miles Coverdale, Sir Thomas Malory, etc. Sir Thomas Malory has published one of the most famous work, that is Maud de Arthur, which emphasizes the value of chastity. This work is a compilation made from a number of French romances. This was the work by Sir Thomas Malory. Then we move on to the most important age, or the golden age in the history of English literature, which brought about a gallery of authors of genius and literary masterpieces. That is the Renaissance period. The Renaissance period. Renaissance means rebirth, the great revival of art, literature, and learning in Europe, beginning in the 14th century and extending to the 17th century. This comprises of Elizabethan age, Jacobean age, Caroline age, Commonwealth period or Puritan interregnum. Age of Queen Elizabeth, that is from 1558 to 1603, comprising the later half of the 16th century, is the golden age in the history of English people. The two important movements of this age, the Renaissance, which I have already talked, that means rebirth or revival of art, literature, and learning in Europe, which arouse intellect in the aesthetic faculties, and the Reformation. Reformation, it was a 16th century religious movement marked by rejection or modification of some Roman Catholic doctrine and practices and establishment of Protestant churches, which awakened the spiritual nature of people. Some of the important events of the age was the establishment of Anglican Church by Queen Elizabeth. Queen Elizabeth comes to the throne in 1558, construction of first playhouse theatre in London in 1576. Some of the important dramatists of the age were Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, Thomas Kidd, and some of the important poets of the age were Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser, and some prose writers, Philip Sidney, Robert Greene, and Francis Bacon. Now we move on to the Jacobean age, that is from 1603 to 1625. After the death of Queen Elizabeth, James I, Jacobean age, came to the throne in 1603, and Elizabethan zest for life is gone, succeeded by a mood of disillusionment and defeat. This was the period in prose writings of Francis Bacon, and he has written his famous essays, John Donne's Sermons, Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy, and King James' translation of Bible. William Shakespeare wrote greatest tragedies and tragicomedies. Other notable poets and playwrights, including John Donne, Ben Jonson, Michael Drayton, Lady Mary Roth, Sir Francis Beaumont, and John Fletcher, John Webster, George Chapman, Thomas Middleton, Philip Massinger, and Elizabeth Carey. Then, important event of the age, that is the death of William Shakespeare in 1616. Next comes the Caroline age, 1625 to 1649. The reign of Charles I, 1625 to 49. The name is derived from Carolus, the Latin version of Charles. This was the time of English civil war fought between the supporters of the king, which are known as Cavaliers, and the supporters of Parliament, who are known by the name as Roundheads, from their custom of wearing their hair cut short. John Milton, one of the famous writers, began writing during this period. John Milton is famous for writing Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, then the works as Samson Agonistus, then poems like Lycidas and Comus. Prominent religious poet was George Herbert, prominent prose writer Robert Burton, and Sir Thomas Browne. Caroline poetry flourished. Cavalier poets were the group of poets in which included Richard Lovelace, Sir John Suckling, Thomas Carreau, Robert Herrick and Robert Herrick. They are also known as Sons of Ben, that is, an admirer and follower of Ben Jonson in many of his lyrics of love and gallant compliment. Then the last division of this period, the Renaissance period, Commonwealth period, that lasts from 1649 to 1660, and it is also known by the name as Puritan Interregnum. Outbreak of civil war in 1640, closing of the theatres in 1642, end of the civil war and beheading of Charles I in 1649, with the establishment of Commonwealth period under the reign of Oliver Cromwell, who ruled England. Then, after the death of Oliver Cromwell in 1659 and the restoration of monarchy by Charles II in 1660, it was the age of John Milton's political pamphlets, Thomas Hobbes' political treatise Leviathan, of the prose writers like Sir Thomas Browne, Thomas Fuller, Jeremy Taylor, Isaac Walton, and of poets like Henry Vaughan, Edmund Waller, Abraham Cole, Sir William Davenant, and Andrew Marvell. Abraham Cowley and metaphysical poets and John Milton were the important writers of this age. With this ends the Renaissance period. Now we move on to the neoclassical period. We divide this period into three segments, that is the Restoration period, the Augustan age, or the Age of Sensibility. The neoclassical period, which starts from 1660 and it lasts up to 1785. The neoclassical period in England stretches for 140 years, and so after the Restoration. The restoration of Charles II to the English throne brought about a revolution. Literature was intellectual rather than imaginative. Poetry became prosaic. So, it was a revolutionary change in the history of English literature. It was brought forward by the Restoration Age, which immensely reflected the political conflict of the late 17th century. John Dryden emerged as one of the prominent literary figures of the age. Some of the important events of the Age of Dryden or the Restoration period were accession of Charles II in 1660, the Great Plague of 1665, the Great Fire of London in 1666. In poetry, John Dryden, who has written one of his famous works, that is Absalom and Achitophel, and other works also like famous heroic poem Astra Redux, and was also known for his Macflecken. And Samuel Butler, who has written the important work is Hudibras, flourished. In prose, John Dryden and John Bunyan. In drama, Restoration comedy of manners flourished. The Augustan age was the age of Alexander Pope. It showed an immense interest for the classical writers of Greece and Rome. The Augustan age or the age of Pope, that is from 1700 to 1745. Then after that, Age of Sensibility, 1745 to 1785, 1700 to 1745. That is the Augustan age was the age of Alexander Pope. It showed an immense interest for the classical writers of Greece and Rome. Alexander Pope was the greatest master of the classical school of poetry. When we say neoclassical, the term neoclassical constitutes a revival or adaptation of the classical, especially in literature, music, art, or architecture. But the Augustan age is considered as one of the most illustrious period of Latin literature, and here it is used as an epithet. Augustan age, that is the golden age of Latin literature, and the age of Pope is called as the golden age of English literature. Alexander Pope was the greatest master of the classical school of poetry. In prose, writers like Daniel Defoe, Jonathan Swift, Joseph Addison, and Richard Steele gained prominence. The last half of 18th century is referred to as Age of Johnson or the Age of Sensibility. refers to as culture and literature, which forms the transition. Sensibility refers to culture and literature, which forms the transition between the neoclassical period and the romantic one, which saw rise of romantic qualities in literature. Some of the important transitional poets who wrote at this time were James Thomson, Cooper, William Collins, and Thomas Gray. Other important writers of the age were Samuel Johnson and Oliver Goldsmith. The age of Johnson also saw the rise of novel. The four wheels of the novel were Richardson, Smollett, Sterne, and Fielding. Samuel Richardson, Tobias Smollett, Thomas Sterne, and Richard Fielding. Other novelists who became famous for Frances Burney, Hannah More, Henry Mackenzie, etc. The Gothic novel also came into prominence. Some historians group at the time of William Godwin, Edmund Burke, David Hume, etc. So this is about the neoclassical period, or which comprises of the three ages, that is the Restoration period, the Augustan age, or the age of sensibility. One thing here I would like to mention that though we mentioned John Milton in the previous age, but he is considered as one of the prominent writer for this age, because he wrote his famous Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Samson Agonistes during Restoration age. Thomas Gray, William Blake, Robert Burns were unavoidable names whose literary work has been highly acclaimed, and the eminent philosopher of this era was John Locke, who wrote many essays like the Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and most of his work delved deeper into the unraveling the workings of the civil society. So, concluding the Restoration period of the history of English literature, the 18th century witnessed the publication of political literature as well as the advent of novels. Like the writers Robert Harley, Daniel Defoe, and Jonathan Swift were among the major political writers of this era. During the mid-18th and late 18th century, novels were introduced in the world. Daniel Defoe experimented with the prose narrative and wrote a novel called Robinson Crusoe, and he is considered as one of the esteemed and prominent writers to introduce novel writing to the literary period. In prose writing, Richard Steele and Jonathan Swift are also some of the popular names in prose writing, as they were renowned for their satirical style of writing. This is from the beginning, from the Old English period to the Neoclassical period, and we will continue with the Romantic literature to the post-modern era in the another video. Thank you. I hope you like the video. Share, like, and subscribe. Thank you.